So we're continuing this paragraph with budgets. What about the budgets? How do we create the budgets? And the first thing I want to talk about is what we call the critical path position of the project. When we create a project plan, we have a Gantt, we resolve resource issues, and based on that, we can find different budget curves, or also called S-curves. The S-curve shows the project expenditure over the life cycle of the project, or the planning phase that we are considering. The S-curve provides us a lot of information, and basically it will lead to the budget baseline. Now, when we look at the first S-curve, here we have all the activities in what we call the early start position. All the activities start as quickly as possible. And in this case, we have a project which has the maximum flexibility. All activities have the maximum slack available. The second element, the second curve, is where all the activities start in the late start position. Here there is no more flexibility left because everything has been moved to the late start position, and that results in the fact that the activities have no more slack available. Now, when we look at this, there are two important elements that we can consider here about the budget itself, about the expenditure of the project. But first, let's have a look at the final curve. When we finish the project, when we resolve all the issues related to resources, we find the final project budget or the baseline. And this is in fact what we call the planned S-curve. So we have all the activities in their planned start and finish times, which may be different from the early and the late start and finish times. Now we see the overview, how we expect to spend money over the project lifecycle. When we look at the S-curve and when we see the baseline, the final S-curve, we have to consider how close is that S-curve to the early start or the late start position. When it's closer to the early start position, it means that we have a higher flexibility. We have more slack available than when it's closer to the late start position. The late start position, there we have no slack. So when the budget curve, the project baseline, cost baseline, is closer to the late start position, we see that we have less flexibility. Another important element is when we look at the cost. When we put all the activities in early start, we will be spending the money very early, at the beginning, at the earliest when we start with an activity. When it's more to the late start position, we will be spending the money later because the activities will start later. This can have some important effects because the later we spend money, the less we have to spend, the less we will pay for using that money. And it can improve our cost position. Let's look at the net present value, the internal rate of return. Selecting or pushing the expenditure to a later time will improve those parameters. Everything has to be considered. We should find a solution where our activities start when there is not too much slack, but we still want to have some reserve in case we need it. Another advantage of starting activities at a later time is that we gain more flexibility. In case there are changes, the activities that already have been completed may have an issue with the changes we want to implement, and we may have to redo them. So it's very important to find the best way to plan the project, and that all leads to the cost baseline and the critical path position of the project. And as a project manager, you want to know that critical path position because you want to know how much flexibility you have available on your project. Once we start from this, we can determine the project budget. When we look at the budget, we derive the cost from the activities. the project management work and risk events. Work cost estimates lead to the project cost baseline, which is given by the S-curve, and that's in fact the basic cost estimate of the project. Adding here the effects of risk, we can add a contingency reserve, and that contingency reserve is in fact adding the cost that we estimate we will have to invest in order to consider and deal with the risks. The last element is when people are adding what we call the management reserve. Now, the project budget is always considered without the management reserve. The management reserve is there so that the management can make decisions. They can add new things. These are decisions that have not been included in the original scope of the project, and the management decides over this budget. They put some additional budget when they want to add some items to the project or implement some changes. So that is all about the project budget. This is the end part of this paragraph, but in the next lesson we will continue with the planning performance domain, and we will be looking deeper into the project team composition. You're doing a great job. Keep on doing the work. Lesson by lesson, step by step, we come to the end of this lesson. It's great to have seen you here. It's great that you are following the lesson plan, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next lessons and videos. Thank you, and bye-bye.